topic. I would like to welcome our principal sir as well in this wonderful program that we have been able to organize on behalf of THLH Mahavidyalaya English Department. Professor Abhijit Sen does not need any kind of introduction. Yet, for its sake, I would like to introduce Sir to all of us. He has been our teacher in the Department of English of Visva-Bharati University, Shantiniketan. He is Professor of English at the Department of English, Visva-Bharati. His chief areas of interest include Renaissance studies, theatre studies, Tagore studies. He has been the coordinator of the departmental SAP DRS program, first phase, with its thrust area as Rabindranath Tagore East-West Confluence. He was guest editor of Sangit Natok, Volume 46, Numbers 1 to 4, 2011, a special issue on Rabindranath's East-West Encounters, Performance and Visual Arts, published by Sangit Natok Academy in 2013. He was the co-editor of Rabindranath Tagore and the Nation Essays in Politics, Society and Culture, published by Punoshcho and Vishwabharati, 2011, and the editor of Shakespeare's Macbeth, published by Pearson Logman, 2009. He has also done an English translation of Tagore's Tasher Desh as the Kingdom of Cards in Essential Tagore, edited by Fakhrul Alam and Radha Chakravarti, Harvard University Press, 2010. He is also into theatre acting, direction, and production. His productions include Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, The Merry Wives of Windsor, Romeo and Juliet, The Wars of the Roses, A Midsummer Night's Dream, as well as Tagore's Visarjan, Raja, and Tashir Des as prose play. Without much ado, I think all of us should lend our ears to what Sir has to say on the topic that he has chosen to discuss and illuminate us on. Rabindranath's seasonal plays, text, and performance. Over to you, Sir, to Professor Abhijit Sen.
Thank you,
Hello?
Camellia. Am I
Yes, sir.
audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very much
Yes.
audible.
Thank you, Camellia, for that very generous introduction, and a very good morning and namaskar to all of you.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
so, what I will do is, I will actually be talking about Rabindranath's seasonal plays, text, and performance. But before I go into the seasonal plays themselves, I will very briefly set the stage by first turning your attention towards certain points about the Bengal Renaissance within which Rabindranath appeared. Because you see, this Bengal Renaissance was informed by the dual poles of Reformation and Revivalism. So, on the one hand, you had the Anglicists clamoring for Reformation. On the other, you had the Orientalists who were talking about revivalism. And therefore, in the context of theatre per se, Shakespeare versus Kalidas, for instance, became a raging debate. Now, 19th century Bengali theatre, if we stop to think about it, is basically urban because it is located in Calcutta primarily. Therefore, when we are talking about Bengali theatre, we're actually talking about Calcutta theatres. And B, it was an imported affair because the whole thing was borrowed from the proscenium theatre which the British had brought with them into 19th century Bengal for the entertainment of the resident English in Calcutta. Therefore, emulating those British theatres, the Bengali Bhadralok, they were making their own theatres, starting with Prashanna Kumar Thakur with his Hindu theatre in 1831. Now, the Tagore family, you must remember, was a front runner in the Bengal Renaissance movement. For the Tagore family, there was also the Jorashako Nattoshala, which was a proscenium theatre itself. But at the same time, this is the other very important point, while this kind of proscenium theatre was being promoted as the important entertainment for the Bhadralok. The indigenous forms of entertainment like Kodikatha, Pachali, Jatra, Kirtan, these had not died out. They were very much surviving, but in the margins. Now, in the Tagore family, since I was talking about the Tagore family, you see, the Jatrawalas were invited, and with the Jatrawalas coming in, you had an exposure to this indigenous theatre, and Rabindranath was aware of that right from his childhood. Therefore, the theatre practices in the Tagore family were in fact informed by this dual pull of the Bengal Renaissance, both reformist and revivalist. Now, if we look at Rabindranath's very early theatrical experiments, when he starts with Balmiki Pratibha in 1881 and goes on till 1890 Bisharjun.
Someone muted, sir. Sir, just a minute.
Uh, am I audible?
Yeah, now you
Am,
are.
yeah. So I was talking about 1881 Balmiki Pratibha, which is an opera kind of Gitinatto, and then Kalmrigoya Mar Khela follow. And then there was the Bisharjun and Raja Orani, which follow the Shakespearean five-act tragic structure. So till then, Rabindranath is very much emulating this Western model. And then after 1890, Bisharjun, there is not much of serious playwriting on the part of Rabindranath till 1908. Therefore, there is a lull of almost 18 years, around which time he's writing some farces like Boykunter Khata, like Gorai Golud, Bini Poishar Bhoj. But he did write two very major plays. I consider them very, very major. One is the verse play Chitrangada of 1892, and the other is Malini, another verse drama of 1896. But Rabindranath was always very, very eager to put his plays into performance almost immediately after he had written them. In these two cases, with these two plays, he did not do it. This was very, very unlike him. One wonders why. But one sees that around this time, when there is, as I suggested, a kind of a lull in serious practices of theatre, he's actually involved in a lot of activity related to nation building. So in 1901, the Brahmacharya is established in Shantiniketan as a kind of an educational program alternative to what was being practiced under the British pedagogical system. In 1905, he becomes involved in the anti-partition movement in Bengal, Curzon's agenda to divide Bengal, and it was Rabindranath who suggested that the day this was to happen, that is 16th October 1905, should be celebrated as Rakhi Bandhan. And Rabindranath himself was there, very much in the vanguard of the procession, tying Rakhi to the wrists of other people. Of course, later on, he kind of withdrew from the movement and he retired to Giridih. But even from there, he was writing all those patriotic songs. The major group of Rabindranath's patriotic songs come around this time. In 1906, he's a member of the National Council of Education. Once again, this movement was going on to find a kind of a university which would be not the kind of British university which Calcutta University had been becoming from 1857 itself. In fact, from National Council of Education, later on, Jadavpur University happened to emerge. But around this time, these 18 years that I've been talking about, 1890s to 19010 or even thereafter, Rabindranath is crystallizing his ideas of the nation. He's writing several essays on nation building. I'll just give you few examples. Ingrejo Bharatbashi, 1893, Raja o Praja, 1894, Kontho Rodh, 1898, which was written against the Sedition Act. Therefore, this is actually talking about the very problematic relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Then trying to recall the history of India, Bharatbarsher Itihash in 1902, and later on Bharatbarsher Itihasher Dhara in 1912, where he's actually arguing for a different kind of historiographical practice. Therefore, instead of the political history, we need the cultural history of the people. In between comes a very, very important essay, which I would consider very seminal, is Swadeshi Samaj, 1904, where he's giving a very constructive agenda of the Swadeshi Samaj, what that should look like against the Eurocentric idea of the nation state. I bring this all up because in the middle of all this, in 1902, right at the end of 1902, in December, on 30th December, in fact, in Bangodarshan, was published his, what could be considered as very important treatise on theatre, Rangomancho. In Rangomancho, he is arguing for an alternative model for Indian theatre. He's, of course, very, very critical of the European kind of realism in the picture frame proscenium theatre. He is very critical of the painted scenery, and he's arguing for a different kind of Indian tradition available both in Sanskrita Natok and in folk drama. In fact, he champions the cause of Jatra very much in Rangomancho. And he continues this argument even later. For instance, the debate between Chittopot and Chitropot that you have, for instance, in Phalguni, in the beginning of Phalguni, or even in the preface of Taputi, where again he's talking about this very indigenous tradition that we had, which we have forgotten, but which we need to revive. What I would want to argue here is that, therefore, Rabindranath was on the one hand imagining a nation, but at the same time, Rabindranath was imagining a theatre for that nation. In fact, I could go even a step forward and say he was imagining a cultural space for that nation. Therefore, what kind of theatre, what kind of song, what kind of dance should that nation have? This is something that he, among all the ideologues, was actually dreaming of. Let me quickly turn to 1901 when he relocates to Shantiniketan. And in relocating to Shantiniketan, he gets a different kind of space, and therefore this enables him to envisage a different kind of theatre in practice. Therefore, what he was imagining, what he was envisaging, actually comes about through actual practice. And in the open air ambience of Shantiniketan, in 1908, he writes Sharadotsav. With Sharadotsav, he comes to a very different kind of drama, both in writing and in performance. But before I move into Sharadotsav, I think it would be pertinent to recall that his youngest son, Shomindranath, in 1907, on the day of Sri Panchami, 17th February, thought of a program through which there would be the celebration of seasons. Therefore, a Ritu Utsav was celebrated at Shantiniketan. At that point of time, Rabindranath was away from the ashram, but Shomindranath, with his very enthusiastic friends, they dressed up as Sharad, Barsha, Bashanto, and they sang and they celebrated the ritus, the seasons. This was Shomindranath doing this on the day of Sri Panchami in 1907. Unfortunately, that very year in November, Shomindranath passes away. Now, as I said, Rabindranath was away at that point of time. Later on in 1908, there is talk about celebration of the monsoon through a Barsha Utsav. Again, Rabindranath was not there in the ashram at that point of time. I mean, he was busy with various other things, attending to various other programs. But Rabindranath encouraged this particular program of trying to do a Barsha Utsav. And then when he comes back, he decides that there should be a celebration of Sharad, autumn. He first writes songs. And then at some point of time, he starts stringing up the songs into the form of a play. And that becomes Shardotshab. Therefore, Shardotshab actually started out as a string of songs, and then it is given the structure of drama. Now, about the theme of Shardotshab, though Rabindranath himself has not directly said anything, but this is something which we have from Kiti Mohan Sen, uh, who apparently says, I quote from Kiti Mohan Sen, তখন part my quoting in Bangla, তখন তিনি প্রকৃতির শুধু হয়তো আনন্দরূপটি দেখিতেছেন, ক্রমে তাহার মনে আসিল একটি গভীর তত্ত্বকথা, বর্ষায় এই পৃথিবী আকাশ হইতে অজস্র রসধারা পায়, শরতে সৌন্দর্য ও সমৃদ্ধিতে পৃথিবী তাহা ফিরাইয়া দিয়া ঋণ শোধ করে। এই কথাই গুরুদেবের মনের মধ্যে তখন ছিল ভরপুর হইয়া, সেই কথাটাই শারদোৎসবের বীজ সত্য। Therefore, this idea of a repayment of debt, and this becomes even more pronounced when we find that when he reworks this play much later, he renames it as Rin Shodh. That is the reworked version of Shardotshab. Now, if we look at Shardotshab itself, the play has two scenes. One is on the road, the other is set on the banks of river Betoshini. And in the presentation of the play through performance also, this very different dramaturgical structure was given a kind of theatrical corroboration. Therefore, 1911, Shardotshab was performed first at Shantiniketan. Rabindranath himself played the role of Shonnashi, who is actually the Emperor Vijayaditya, who is disguised as the Shonnashi. And the students are reported to have decorated the stage with lotus flowers, with kash phool, with leaves and foliage, so on and so forth. And Rabindranath allowed only a blue backcloth to stand in for the sky. Abhinendranath, who's also in charge of the stage decor, he wanted to use a mica sprinkled umbrella. Abhinendranath says, Abhro Shojjito Rajchhatro. But Rabindranath did not like it, and he had it removed, and he said the bare stage should remain clear and fresh. That should be the appropriate setting for the two scenes, the road and the banks of river Betoshini. As I said, much later on, in 1928, when the play was renamed as Rin Shodh, it was again performed at the Ashram School, and Nandolal Boshu was in charge of the stage decor. He used a backdrop which, and I have this from Porimal Goswami, gave the distant impression of white foamy waves on a sea of green. I mean, in Bengal, in autumn, the fields are all green and they wave with the winds and they look like foamy waves because in between the green crops, you have the kash phool coming up. The kash is in bloom at that point of time. And Nandolal probably had this in mind. Therefore, it is not really a realistic setting, but there is a suggestive suggestion. And this overall impression is there without actually realistically depicting any individual detail. Now, going back to Shardotshab, Shardotshab, therefore, whether as Shardotshab or as Rin Shodh, was trying to bring in this even through performance. If I quickly take a look at Phalguni, the other major seasonal play I have in mind, which is of 1915, this thematically seems to recall the concept of the vegetative myth, which is based on the cycle of seasons. If you remember the story of Phalguni, the Nabojauboner Dol go out in search of the Budo, the old man, and then ultimately they find when that in the fourth act, when the old man slips out of the dark cave, which was so formidable, the old man happens to be their very own young Shardar. Therefore, the old man kind of metamorphoses into the young Shardar. winter metamorphosing into spring. Therefore, this cycle of season, which was actually at the base of all vegetative myths in all cultures, in one way, this whole idea of a vegetative god who's born in spring, reaches primehood in summer, matures in autumn, dies in winter, to be reborn in the next spring. Therefore, Rabindranath's Phalguni is also projecting such a journey. But mind you, in Rabindranath being Rabindranath, this is not merely the vegetative myth. It becomes more than a cyclic pattern of seasons. It is actually suggestive of a greater order that defines life. Therefore, in Rabindranath, this whole condition of death being a part of life, which he keeps on arguing. Therefore, this is something that he brings about in Phalguni. In fact, there have been scholars who have tried to say that Phalguni is not merely a play about seasons, it is also a play about death returning to life. And this, as you all know, was a major concern of Rabindranath throughout his entire career. And mind you, once again, in its theatrical form, in performance, he was again offering a difference of not a realistic kind, but a very different kind that he was bringing about. And in fact, when the first performance was given at the ashram on 25th April 1915 in Shantiniketan, Rabindranath came forward before the play actually began, and he kind of made should I say, an apology before the audiences. And he tried to suggest that his play is like his Kunna, whom he's trying to Shampradan, he's trying to give away in marriage. But he has not decked her up in Olonkar. He has left her with the Olonkar of the inside, the value of the inside, without external embellishments. And one might remember again Rangamanch at this point of time, where he did talk about how even the bare stage could ultimately invigorate the imagination of the audience. Therefore, this is what he has in mind. And then, having talked about that Shampradan, he says, and I quote, নাটকের অনেক সরঞ্জামের দাবি আমি পূরণ করতে পারিনি, কতকটা ইচ্ছা করেও করিনি, দৃশ্যপট, কনসার্ট, জবনিকা প্রভৃতি সব বাদ দিয়েছি। এই যে গাছের ডাল কেটে কৃত্রিম বন তৈরি করা হয়েছে, এটাও আমার ইচ্ছা ছিল না। এই সব সরঞ্জাম দর্শকদের অনেক সাহায্য করে সন্দেহ নেই, কিন্তু এই সাহায্যে সম্প্রতি এমন বাড়াবাড়ি হয়ে উঠেছে যে দর্শকদের কল্পনা নাকি প্রায় লোপ হবার তাকির হয়েছে। This is exactly what he said also in রঙ্গমঞ্চ। নাট্যকারের লেখার যদি প্রাণ থাকে তাহলে দর্শকবৃন্দের কোনো বাধাই থাকা উচিত নয়। পারিপার্শ্বিক অবস্থাটি কল্পনা করে নিতে আশা করি এক্ষেত্রে আপনারা তাই করবেন, এটি আমার বিনীত অনুরোধ। This is what he's saying. And in the very structure of the play, what he's doing is he's collapsing together topographic and psychic spaces. Therefore, if you look at the play closely, number one, the protagonist is not one person. It is a chorus, the Nabojaubaner Dol, the group of youth who have gone out in search of the Buru, the old man. And mind you, when the speeches come, they are not assigned to any particular persons. It is to the group. Anybody can speak. There is no specific speech divisions in the play. And even the way the scenes are set, each scene begins with a prelude song. And even in the written version, you find Pratham Drishyo, Shutropat, Path, Dityo Drishyo, সন্ধান ঘাট, তৃতীয় দৃশ্য সন্দেহ মাঠ, চতুর্থ দৃশ্য প্রকাশ গুহাদ্বার। Therefore, each locale, পথ, ঘাট, মাঠ, গুহাদ্বার, has been equated with a psychic space, a সন্ধান, or a সন্দেহ, or a প্রকাশ. Therefore, he's doing something very, very different in this play from the kind of plays to which Bangla theatre was accustomed. And this is there even in the dialogue. Again, may I quote from the Bangla? I think it comes out much better. দেখছিস এখানকার হাওয়াটা কেমন তর, এখানে আকাশটা যেন যাবার বেলাকার বন্ধুর মতো মুখের দিকে তাকিয়ে আছে, যারা সেখানে বলেছিল চল চল তারা এখানে বলছে যাই যাই। And then please note this particular sentence. ঝাউ গাছের বিথিকার ভেতর দিয়ে কোথা থেকে এই একটা নদীর স্রোত চলে আসছে, এ যেন কোন দুপুর রাতের চোখের জল। Again, see how the psychic situation, চোখের জল, and ঝাউ গাছের বিথিকার ভেতর দিয়ে একটা নদী চলে আসছে, this is being equated. This is what he's doing, both in the stage setting and in the way the dialogue moves. In fact, during the first performance, the stage decor was in tune with this kind of poetic structure. Therefore, Shita Devi, for instance, remembers how in the stage was again strewn with leaves and foliage, and there were two swings on the two sides, and there were two small boys gleefully singing on these swings as the songs were being sung. And yes, later on, in 1916, the very next year, it was given in Kolkata for the Bakura famine. It was a charity show. And for this, Rabindranath added a prologue, Boiragya Sadhan. He in fact performed in that prologue himself. And there also, you find Indira Devi. She's talking about how, in place of the previous Western conventions of stage realism, you just had a blue backdrop. And against that black backdrop, you had a single branch of a tree with a single red flower at its tip. And there was pale moonshine at the back with a crescent moon suggested. This is what Shotendranath Dotto has to write about that performance. সাজসজ্জায় বিশেষ কোনো যুগের বা বিশেষ কোনো জাতির হুবহু অনুকরণ করা হয়নি, আর দৃশ্যপট যা দেখানো হয়েছে তা ভূগোল পরিচয়ের কোনো পর্যায়ের সঙ্গেই মেলে না। নীল রঙের পর্দায় সবুজের আভা আকাশে এবং অরণ্যে মিলেমিশে যেন নিবিড় হয়ে উঠেছে। গোটা কত তারা দেখা যাচ্ছে, হরশিরস্রোত চন্দ্রকলার মতো একটুখানি চাঁদও দেখা দিয়েছে। দু একটা গাছের ডাল মাথার উপর ঝুঁকে রয়েছে, তার একটাতে একটি ঝুলনো বাঁধা, দু একটি লতা লতিয়ে উঠছে, উঁচু নিচু জায়গায় ফাঁকে ফাঁকে তৃণমঞ্জরে বসন্তের হাওয়ায় রঙিন হয়ে উঠছে। Incidentally, when this play was later translated as The Cycle of Spring, the translation done by Andrews and Nishikanto, but Rabindranath apparently had a lot of hand in that translation also. There you find, right at the beginning, there is a kind of a direction for the stage setting. And it says there, the purple secondary curtain goes up, disclosing the elevated rear stage with sky background of dark blue on which appear the horn of the crescent moon and the silver points of stars. Tree in the foreground with two ropes entwined with garlands of flowers. Flowers everywhere in profusion. On the extreme left, the mouth of a dark cavern, deeply seen. But incidentally, as I said, for the Boiragya Sadhan, which he added for the 1916 performance, there was this royal court which was added, and Ashit Kumar Haldar, who helped Nandalal Boshu with the stage decor, says this royal court used a very ornate Ajanta style, and it was at one corner, and the rest of the stage diagonally was left bare for the main play to happen. Having talked about Phalguni and before that Sharadutsav, may I very briefly refer back to another play which I think is important. Though it is a rather immature composition, I would say. Rabindranath did not do this on the stage ever. But this is 1884, Prakritir Pratishod. You see, it is an immature composition, but in many ways it seems to set out the parameters which his later plays, including the seasonal plays, seem to have followed both in content and in form. And that Rabindranath considered it important is attested by the fact that in Jiban Sriti, he devotes a whole section to Prakriti Pratishod. And may I read a bit from there? I'm again reading from the Bangla Jiban Sriti. হৃদয়ের পথ দিয়াই প্রকৃতি সন্ন্যাসীকে আপনার সীমা সিংহাসনের অধিরাজ অসীমের খাস দরবারে লইয়া গিয়াছিলেন। প্রকৃতির প্রতিশোধের মধ্যে একদিকে যত সব পথের লোক, যত সব গ্রামের নরনারী, তাহারা আপনাদের ঘর গড়া প্রাত্যহিক তুচ্ছতার মধ্যে অচেতনভাবে দিন কাটাইয়া দিতেছে। আর একদিকে সন্ন্যাসী, সে আপনার ঘর গড়া এক অসীমের মধ্যে কোনো মতে আপনাকে ও সমস্ত কিছুকে বিলুপ্ত করিয়া দিবার চেষ্টা করিতেছে। প্রেমের সেতুতে যখন এই দুই পক্ষের ভেদ ঘুচিল, গৃহীর সঙ্গে সন্ন্যাসীর যখন মিলন ঘটিল, তখনই সীমায় অসীমে মিলিত হইয়া সীমার মিথ্যা তুচ্ছতা ও অসীমের মিথ্যা শূন্যতা দূর হইয়া গেল। And then, of course, he relates this to how this happened in his very life, particularly with Nirjhare Shapnabhango, how from a dark cave within him, he went to move on to sunshine, to the sun's rays. Now, this movement, this journey, may I say, this quest is something that informs, and Rabindranath says this in this piece on Prakriti Pratishod in Jiban Sriti, this informs his entire Kabya Rachana, as he says in that piece. All his works, in fact, are informed by this quest. I would suggest this is a very typical quest for a romantic who is continuously trying to move forward to something beyond this reality, that which is unattainable, and continuously trying to relate it to the reality. The reality is never denied, but that unattainable remains just beyond the reach. Rabindranath's trend, of course, has been to find a bridge between the two. Therefore, this journey, this movement from darkness, from ignorance, to light, to knowledge, and therefore a fuller comprehension of life. This becomes a major concern of Rabindranath in many of his later compositions, in fact in many of his plays. Therefore, without understanding darkness, you cannot understand light. And this is exactly what happened in Phalguni. As I said, from out of that dark cave, the old man slipped out and was metamorphosed into a youth. Therefore, this understanding that the old man and the youth are the one and the same, this is exactly the understanding that you have of Sudarshana, for instance, in Raja. Only when she realizes that she must step out of her ignorance, probably through the trial of fire, that she understands the importance of the darkness. She understands the worth of Raja. What I'm trying to suggest, therefore, is that this path has to be traversed not only in the seasonal plays, but also in his other plays. May I keep myself restricted to drama here? It could be argued about his other works also. So, if Upanando of Sharadutsav or the Nabajaubanek Dol in Phalguni are making this kind of a journey, so is Panchak of Achalayatan, Sudarshana of Raja, Amol of Dagkhor, the regimented cards of Tashirdesh, or even the Raja behind the web, the net in Jokhopuri of Raktokorbi. Therefore, in their journey, they probably find support from some more enlightened fellow humans. There are people around them who can show them the way. Therefore, in Sharadotsav, there is the Shonnashri. In Phalguni, there is the blind bowl. Yes, and this is important in Phalguni. It is a blind bowl who leads the way. And the Navajobarne Dal are extremely apprehensive about this. They have misgivings that the Baul can't see. How will he lead? And the Baul says, I see the light from within. I do not need the light from outside. And this is the way the Baul leads them on. Similarly, you have the Thakurda character in Dagkhor, for instance, or again in Raja, leading on, giving a sense of direction. In Raja, you have another person to help Sudarshana, and that is Shrangama, her companion. In Muktodhara, there is Dhananjay Boiragi. In Raktokorbi, there is, of course, Nandini, who helps Raja to break his web. But there is also Bishu, who continuously keeps encouraging and inciting the rest of the miners, like Pagulal or Chandra. And in Tashiddesh, it is the Rajputro, the prince, who comes from a different land to help the Tash to break their chains. May I mention here, in fact, in Kalir Jatra, which is the conflation of Rothe Roshi and Kobir Dikha, and which is a late play, 1932, he is very, very cautious even to talk about the reverse journey. Therefore, there will be an onward journey till a point of saturation will be reached. And then there will be a journey in the reverse. So the wheels of the chariot will roll on relentlessly in quest for truth, in quest for change, if need be, in the reverse direction. Now, as I have suggested, the dramaturgical structure has encapsulated this quest in very many ways. Mind you, I will not suggest that this quest, this search for a truth, was not there in the earlier plays. You have a quest in Rani Shumitra of Raja Rani. You have a quest in Jaisingho of Visarjun. You have a quest in Malini of Malini. But from Sharadotsav onwards, I would suggest this quest is actually woven into the very dramaturgical structure of the plays. And for this, in particular, a contrast between spaces is used. On the one hand, you have an open expanse. You have a path or a road or a meadow or a river bank. And the other, you have a confined space. The miser Lokeshwar's room in Sharadotsav. Lokeshwar's room is never shown on the stage, but it's just there off stage, from which he keeps coming out trying to drive away the people. And there is the dark cave I mentioned in Phalguni. There is the quarantined room of Amol, to which Amol is confined. And there is the path in front of him along which the others move. There is the dark chamber of Raja. There is the walled-in institution of Achalayatan. There is the web of the king of Jokhopuri in Raktokorbi, and the regimented kingdom in the Tashildesh. All these confined spaces are played off against the open expanse of the road, of the meadow. And this is suggested through the theatrical scenography. This is my submission here. Therefore, this journey from confinement to emancipation, from ignorance to enlightenment, is actually made available on the stage through the theatrical language. And I feel that particularly with the seasonal plays, like Sharadotsav or Phalguni, the open air ambience of Shantiniketan would have been made most of. Therefore, that open air atmosphere would be used for the best advantage in these seasonal plays. But well, of course, there have been many reviewers who have said that when Raja has been done in Shantiniketan and when Raja has been done in New Empire Theatre in Kolkata, they have been two very, very different affairs. For that matter, may I speak from personal experience? I once had the very good fortune of doing Raja in open space in Shantiniketan, in the facade of Patobhabun. And it instantly opened up an entire new kind of performance text. It became a very, very different text from what we usually do with Raja in the proscenium theatre. May I come to my conclusion? And in conclusion, I think it could be argued that this celebration of seasons, whether through songs and dances or through full-fledged plays, whatever it is, through this celebration of seasons, Rabindranath was probably trying to achieve yet another purpose. You see, people usually gather together for religious occasions, to observe certain religious rites or rituals. But by making the celebration of seasons an event for people to come together, Rabindranath was offering to the community a secular occasion to assemble together. Therefore, it is not so much the observation of a religious ritual. It is not so much the worship of a particular deity. It is the celebration of the seasons, which can also make people come together. In fact, if one stops to think, the early occasions when Basantotsav was celebrated in the Shantiniketan ashram, they were usually celebrated on the day of Sri Panchami, that is the day of Saraswati Puja. When Somendranath did his Ritu Utsav, that of course he didn't call it Basantotsav, he did it as Ritu Utsav, celebration of seasons. This was 17th February 1907. It was Sri Panchami. Even later, when I was at random going through the records, on 13th February 1921, 22nd January 1923, 9th February 1924, all these are days of Sri Panchami on which Basantotsav had been celebrated at the ashram. In fact, interestingly, on that last occasion, that is 9th February 1924, Nandalal Bosu and Shuren Kaur had decorated the site where this was done. It was an open air thing. And among other things, of course, there was alpona, there was flowers, there was a platform. But along with that, there were also two replicas of the Bina to suit the occasion. Therefore, it is Sri Panchami. There is the Bina, but the Bina is there not as an overt religious emblem, more as a kind of an aesthetic motive. Therefore, my suggestion would be, ultimately, my submission would be, that there is a possibility of seeing Rabindranath's tendency to secularize the celebration of seasons as an event to bring people come together, to have people come together. Therefore, in that way, and I've talked about the seasonal plays, but there have been many occasions where there have been the celebration of the seasons through Borsha Mongol, through Shesh Boshon, through Riturango, so on and so forth. And all of that has basically added to this whole agenda of celebration of seasons, which Rabindranath had undertaken. I have, of course, here tried to keep myself primarily confined to the seasonal plays. That had been my announced topic. Therefore, the text and performance of Sharadotshab and Phalgun in particular. But I did think it proper, I did think it only natural to veer into this other direction, roping in not only Prakritir Pratishod, but also the other performances of the Ritu Utshab, the celebration of the seasons that Rabindranath had engaged in and negotiated with. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, hello, sir.
Hello,
Thank you, sir.
yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful, insightful lecture on Tagore. No words perhaps can be enough to express our gratitude to Sir for this sublime experience and transferring the entire Tagore's world of seasonal plays in words in the short span of time and talking about its contexts, relevance, deception, and also criticisms. I know that there might be few questions, and sir, may I
Yes,
read
please.
the questions from the chat
Yes,
box?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, so the first question that I have over here is from some, I don't know the name. Okay, he or she talks about that. Please tell us something about the factors that contribute to the cultural confluence that makes Bengal a model for India.
Uh, well, to talk about Bengal as a model for India uh, is a little difficult because you see, we cannot compartmentalize in that way. India, of course, has been, on the one hand, a quote unquote nation where there have been so many races, religions, languages. Therefore, this thriving on multiracial, multicultural, multilingual diversity has been there. But at the same time, one must also remember that there has been a trend, and this has gained ground in recent times even more, to give a sense of recognition to these diversities. Therefore, it is not as though all these diversities should be ironed out in the name of unity. The unity thrives on the diversity. Now, Bengal uh, as a model for that is difficult to define, though the fact remains that Bengal, A, because it was first annexed by the British, therefore came in contact with the British first, and probably it is the presence of the British which enabled India to unite itself as one quote unquote nation against the British. But that later on again was taken up by other parts of India also. Therefore, I'm not very sure that one can only speak of Bengal in that sense. And you must remember when Rabindranath talked about the idea of Desh, he was continuously moving back and forth between the idea of Bengal and the idea of India. And in that sense, um, since I mentioned Swadeshi Samaj, may I come back to that? Rabindranath, of course, was not very comfortable, in fact, very unhappy, with the idea of a unified nation state. He talked about the Swadeshi Samaj, where the Samaj, not the political nation state, would actually be the focus, because that is the way he thought our indigenous society had worked. Therefore, it is not that the king from the top should dictate everything, or the centralized form of government should dictate everything. Every person should have a say in the workings of the Samaj. As he says in Swadeshi Samaj, and Swadeshi Samaj was occasioned by drought, therefore, the point of petitioning to the viceroy to have more wells and ponds dug up to get rid of the problem of drought. But Rabindranath says there, why should we only be looking up to the government? In earlier times in Swadeshi Samaj, he says, anybody, any person who had the resources would dig up a pond, would dig up a well, would for that matter found a school. Therefore, everybody needs to make his or her contribution to the Samaj. We need not or should not look up only to the king. If the king was indifferent to the needs of the Samaj does not necessarily go bare. Therefore, this is something that he says in Swadeshi Samaj very importantly. Therefore, I know this does not quite answer the question, but this is something that he talks about in Swadeshi Samaj. But later on, may I just add to that, when he realizes that there is a rabid nationalism on the rise, which again he's not very comfortable with, he starts siding with people like Bertrand Russell or Romarola in talking about universalism. But he says that in trying to promote one's own jati alone at the cost of other jatis will help nobody. Therefore, a particular community cannot thrive at the expense of the others. Therefore, there has to be a complete universal brotherhood which marches together. He was extremely misunderstood. He was extremely criticized for this stand that he took, because at that point of time, there was a lot of movement towards nationalism, but Rabindranath was not comfortable with this kind of nationalism. And that is exactly why, in response to Gandhi's boycott of everything Western, he was trying to say in an essay like Shikhar Milan that you cannot totally remove or deny everything Western. He says Bidda itself is not something that is at fault. It is the way we are using the Bidda. Therefore, the Bidda is available both for the Devata and the Daitya. It is there probably with Shukracharya. But we need to gain that Bidda. Therefore, in fact, he allowed the use of tractors in Shantiniketan. He was not averse to it. But he's saying the machine should not gain the control of the human. This is the important point about Rabindranath's stand. And therefore, we need to have a kind of confluence of cultures between East and West. He was thinking of Visva-Bharati as a kind of Eastern, Asiatic kind of society, but an Asiatic society which would not close its windows to the West. And therefore the motto of Visva-Bharati, where the whole world would make its nest. This is the kind of confluence that he was ultimately thinking of.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so Tagore is indeed very relevant in our present times as well. So the next question is from Rima Laha. What is the similarity between Tagore's Notir Puja and Eliot's murder in the cathedral?
Yes, I mean, the protagonists are both martyred in the cause of religion, in the cause of even, I would suggest, emancipation of the self. More than the religion, I think it is the realization of the self that becomes important. There, I think we do have uh, a kind of similarity. But of course, there are also differences. There are also differences because Eliot's murder in the cathedral, if you remember, its first occasion was definitely to recall the martyrdom of Becket in the very context of the Canterbury Cathedral. The very first performance was at the Canterbury Cathedral venue, and therefore the overt religious overtones were markedly present. With Notir Puja, mind you, the Buddhist model is something that Rabindranath was responding to over and over again. Uddhav was a very, very favorite of Rabindranath. In Noti Puja, he brings up the Noti championing the cause of Buddhism. But again, as I'm trying to suggest, unlike Eliot, it is not the religion which takes the foreground here. It is rather the call of truth. Somebody who's convinced about a truth is prepared to lay down his life for the sake of that truth. That is what the Noti would say. Therefore, in Eliot, the address that Beckett gives between the two acts is loaded in the Christian idea of martyrdom. But in Noti Puja, the song that she sings before she's actually killed, the song and the dance, Amay Khomo He Khomo, is not overtly religious. It is something to do about oneself. It is something to do about one's failings. Therefore, Amay Khomo He Khomo, Ami Parini, Parini Tulite Pujar Phul, Bhora Hoini Kolosh. And therefore, there is some failing in me that needs your pardon. This kind of realization of truth, which the Noti has gained. And mind you, she's the Noti. She's the court dancer. And yet, and in the Noti Puja, she removes her dress of the court dancer, and from within it is the dress of the bhikkhuni which emerges. You see, the religious overtones are there, but much more than the religious overtones, it is this personal movement, a journey that I had been talking about, towards a realization of truth that becomes important. I think that is where Noti Puja is important. May I just linger a bit on this point?
Yes,
That is, again, taking it in a different direction maybe, but theatrically speaking. You see, when Noti Puja was performed in Shantiniketan, there was a lot of praise for it. And then there was talk to take it over to Kolkata for performance, particularly to raise funds for Visva-Bharati. And many people in Shantiniketan ashram itself raised their eyebrows, because that would mean that Gauri Boshu, the daughter of Nandalal Boshu, who had played Noti, would have to dance on the public stage in Kolkata. And many people in Shantiniketan were frowning on this point. Rabindranath went to Shubira Devi, Nandalal's wife, with this problem. Shubira Devi left it to him. She said, the play is yours, it's entirely your responsibility. Dosh holeo apnar se daitto, gun holeo apnar se daitto. Rabindranath, to tide over the problem, he did something remarkable. He created a male character for the play. This male character was not there in the first version. This is Upali, who arrives right at the beginning of the play to bless the Noti, and again comes right at the end of the play to lay flowers on the dead body of the Noti, paying his respects to her. And Rabindranath himself played this role. Therefore, in a way, by putting himself into the performance, Rabindranath erased out all possibilities of criticism. And from that time onwards, when mixed casting was becoming an everyday affair, particularly with the dance dramas coming on, you must have seen many photographs where you will find Rabindranath sitting at one corner of the stage. And this is something I'm fond of saying. Even when he's not participating, at times he did participate, but even when he's not participating, he's there on the stage. And his very presence on the stage, in a way, is legitimizing the performance. The performance where boys and girls, men and women are playing together, dancing together. You see, therefore his very presence actually, and this is something that I'm getting from the reviewer of Statesman, who wrote this about the performance of Shama, that his very presence actually is able to transform nautch, N-A-U-T-C-H, nautch into dance. Therefore, what was initially considered an affair of the Baijis is given a respectability by Rabindranath. This is what I was talking about, the way he was trying to form a cultural space for this nation. Yes, Camellia. Anything
Hello, sir. Am I
else?
audible?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes, you
Can you
are.
hear me? Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
I
there is,
can.
yes, sir. There is one more question, sir. Can you take
Yes,
that?
please.
Just okay.
Yes, please,
So
please.
there is one Hiranyo Lahiri. He has
Yes.
asked about discussion on Sundor and Nobin, as well
Hmm.
as whether open air theatre was a concept introduced to Indian theatre by Tagore, or was it in vogue prior to him?
May I take up the second part first? No, obviously it wasn't introduced by Tagore. You did have the very long tradition of indigenous theatre, the folk form of theatre, which happened
Yes.
in open air. That was very much there. And as I said in Rangomanchu, he was looking back to Jatra. He was definitely articulating his reservations about the painted scenery that you had in proscenium theatre. The fact is that he was not getting a scope to put this into experimentation as long as his plays were being performed in Kolkata stages. In Kolkata, the stages, even in his own residence, Jodashaku, the Jodashaku Natyashala, was a performance theatre. It is when in Shantiniketan he gets this open space that he's actually able to put this into practice. But he must have been thinking about this from quite some time. Because, as I said, he was aware of the Jatra tradition, he was aware of the folk traditions. Uh, as to the other bit about Boshanto and Nobin, well,
Sundur and Nobin, sir.
I'm
Sundur
sorry,
and Nobin.
Shundar and Nobin. Well, Shundar is a play which he first wrote, and then there was a possibility of performance, but which got washed away because of tremendous rains. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the dates right in front of me now, but later on that same year, during um, during Borsho, that is on 13th of April, Shundar was staged in Shantiniketan. If you look up Shantidev Ghosh, you will find this recorded there. And then again, a few years later, Shundar was staged at Jorashako itself. Okay? Uh, the other was Nobin. Yes, Nobin again, a medley of songs and dances. Nobin, well, I'm sorry, I don't have the dates or the data right in front of me, but as far as I can recall, Nobin was also first performed in Shantiniketan. And all these are, well, Nobin, Shundar, Riturango, all of these are more medleys of songs and dances than drama proper. Shantidev Ghosh has in fact said that this is about, I think, Shundar. He makes this statement that it was Mukabhinoy, Gitabhinoy, and a kind of Dehir Bhungi, not quite dance, a kind of rhythmic pattern of bodily movement which went into the making of these. And he uses another word there, Shantidev Ghosh. He uses the term nattabhash. There is a hint of drama. Therefore, he brings in certain characters. He gives a very thin plot structure to make those characters speak, but that is more an excuse to string up the songs and the dances together. This is what is happening with most of these other seasonal, well, if you want, plays, seasonal dramas. But I would be a little hesitant to call them plays proper, though again, mind you, I must admit that with Rabindranath, the idea of drama is so very fluid. I mean, even dance drama is drama of a kind. He was actually moving in that direction. But for the sake of convenience, in my presentation today, I have restricted myself to seasonal plays in the sense of the drama that we understand. That for the play, as you have uh, in Phalguni and in Sharadotsav. But I will submit that drama moves on to a more expansive kind of region with Rabindranath, particularly as he moves on to the Nrityanattos, the dance dramas at the end.
Okay. Okay, sir, there are a few more questions, but
But do you have time? Do you have time?
yes, sir, we have
I
time,
have
sir.
time, but yes,
Oh, okay,
yes,
sir.
it's
Okay,
okay with me.
okay, sir. Then it's fine. Then there is a question from one Partho Protim Sarkar. He
Yes.
talks about okay. Tell me, sir, that would Tagore write Rokto Korbi from Marxist point of view?
This, of course, is something that has been much debated upon. You see, Rabindranath had gone to Russia. Rabindranath had been moved by what he'd seen in Russia. But at the same time, Rabindranath had also, if you look up Russia Chithi, Rabindranath has also sounded a caveat that there could be problems if this is going to move towards regimentation itself. I mentioned Kale Jatra. In Kale Jatra, this is exactly what he's talking about. That if this so-called progressive movement ultimately reaches a point of saturation, then there will be a movement in the reverse direction. Now, in Rakta Korobi, number one, he's definitely talking about the two kinds of communities he has in mind. One is the nation state, the Eurocentric kind of community, which is available in the Jokhupuri situation. And the other is the Swadesh Samaj kind of indigenous community, which he had in mind with the miners, the Khodaikars. And mind you, all these miners, Chandra, Phagulal, Bishu, do not originally belong to Jokhupuri. They have come from a different place. They have been brought there. Jokhupuri is not their place. That is why Chandra wants to return to their native place on the occasion of Navanno. You see, therefore, this community shares um, a kind of memory, a collective memory, through which it communicates with each other. And Nandini is also a part of them. Right at the end of the play, Phagulal says, "Tumiyo to amaderi ghorer meye." Nandini comes from that other place. For that matter, if you remember, the song that comes into the play is not sung from within Jokhupuri. It is coming from afar. Poshto de dag diyeche. A call to Raja to respond to nature instead of to the gold, which Raja is so concerned with. Therefore, if the system of Jokhupuri is a very acquisitive, mechanical situation, very exploitative, very oppressive, then there is another kind of system, there is another kind of life that Nandini is talking about. And that is exactly why she attracts everybody in the play. She is both a kind of a challenge and a source of attraction for Raja, even for Shardar. If you remember, when Major Shardar points out that তোমার চোখেও রক্তকরবীর আভা লেগেছে, Shardar responds, হবে, মনের কথা মন নিজেও জানে না. Therefore, even Shardar somewhere feels a kind of a kind of a attraction, I would say, for Nandini, because Nandini is different, and this difference is what constitutes her attraction. This difference is because she champions life as opposed to the kind of dead acquisitive gold which Raja and his group are continuously hoarding. In fact, Raktakarbi brings up a very important contrast between Kuber and Lokhi. Lokhi, mind you, is not the goddess of wealth. Lokhi is Sri. Sri means prosperity. Sri means abundance. Sri means grace. Lokhi is that. The god of acquisitive wealth is Kuber. You hoard the gold, you hoard the wealth, and therefore his followers are the Jokhos, and therefore Jokhopuri. This is what he's talking about in the play. Now, if you want, you can make a Marxist reading of this play. It is very, very possible. In fact, this is something I got from Shambhu Mitra himself. Shambhu Babu had once said that when they had produced the play and there was a lot of furor, there was even talk that Shambhu Mitra has made Rabindranath into a communist. He has used a word which is not there in the text, Sreni, class. And then Shambhu Babu said, it is there in the text itself. And yes, it is. Goshai tells, Amader Srenir opor beshi bhar dewa hoyeche. So the idea of class is there, and these are the two classes, the exploiters and the exploited. It is very much the story of Raktakarbi. If you want, you can certainly make a Marxist reading of this.
Okay, sir. Thank you so
Yes.
much. And sir, I think one last question. It is from Shomipendra Banerjee.
Yes,
He
please.
wants to know, would you also comment on Tagore's engagement with realism in connection with the seasonal plays? Would you say this is a relation of conflict?
Yes, you see, in his early plays, there is a lot of realism. For that matter, 1881, when Balmiki Pratibha is being done, Nitindranath was in charge of the stage setting, and not only did he layer the stage with mud to plant trees and branches to simulate forest, but because the Bono Debis will have to dance in the rain, rim jim ghono ghono re borishe, therefore he directed pipes from the first floor bathrooms to sprinkle water on the stage. It was as realistic as that. You see, and this was happening in Jorashako Natyashala. Indira Devi Chodharani says that when Mayar was being produced, they picked up fireflies, Jonaki, and planted them into the heads of the wands of the Maya Kumaris. Therefore, the Jadu Dondo that would twinkle in with the lights of the fireflies. That kind of realism was being used. Now, Rabindranath had to submit to this. But obviously, Rabindranath was not feeling comfortable. And I would suggest that that period of lull in his writing and more importantly in his productions between 1890 and 1908 that I talked about is probably because of this discomfort also. Apart from the fact that he was fashioning his own ideas about the nation around that time. And the two go hand in hand. And that is exactly what is precipitated in an essay like Ramamancha. It is because of his thinking about a nation and because of his discomfort about that kind of pictorial realism that he is trying to move in the direction of a more suggestive mode which the Jatra or the indigenous theatre could make available. Therefore, there is this tussle in him. And this is what he was trying to uh, put into practice when it comes to Shantiniketan. Shantiniketan kind of becomes the ground of experimentation for him. But having said that, when he takes the same plays to Kolkata, he has to work within the constraints of the proscenium theatre. He does not get an open space there. Yes, indeed, there have been occasions where even in Jorashako, for instance, some of the Ritu Utshab Barshamongol has been done in the yard behind the Bichitra Bhavan. But then there have been several plays where in Jorashako Natyashala, the plays have been given. Think of that picture, which most of you must have seen, of the Dagghar presentation, where Rabindranath was in charge of the stage decor and the very, very detailed realism that you have there. The thatched roof, the room of Amol, and of course, as Rabindranath said, even that bird cage, but of course the bird wasn't there. Therefore, a bit of suggestiveness that's being put in there. But again, I would want to place that as an example of that constrained, confined space against which the front of the stage would act as that expanse of the road where the rest of the people are working. But this dichotomy, I wouldn't call it a conflict, but this dichotomy between a proscenium theatre and his idea of an open expanse would always be there when he is bringing his plays into Kolkata, or again when he's taking them, for instance, for performance in other places in India, for instance, in Bombay or in Ceylon, for instance, beyond India. Therefore, this would be there. But what he would be doing is, again, may I suggest, he was trying to reinscribe the appendages of the proscenium with more oriental kinds of designs. For instance, in 1935, there was a production of Raja in New Empire Theatre. Now, obviously, New Empire Theatre is a proscenium theatre. But he's doing Raja there, which would have been a very, very different affair from the 1911 Raja done, but this wasn't an open space. It was a barnyard kind of situation, but well, a more expansive mode in Shantiniketan in 1911. But in 1935, when he's doing it in New Empire, it is a proscenium theatre. But what he does there is, he has the stage decor fitted with an oriental gate and various other oriental motifs. Therefore, somewhere within the Western form of the proscenium theatre, he is bringing in certain overlayings of oriental motifs. And through this, he's kind of doing a kind of tightrope walking, a kind of blending of different theatrical codes. Uh, and of course, I will also want you to remember at this point of time, this is 1935, by that time, he had moved towards his idea of universalism. Therefore, he was no longer totally rejecting everything Western. Visva-Bharati had been formed by then, and therefore by that time, he was also accepting the proscenium stage, but reinscribing it with oriental motifs. In a way, it was becoming a confluence of different cultures. I don't know if that answers Shobhabindra's question.
Okay, sir, thank you so
Right.
much. So, another question is from Shucheta Gorai. She is quite insistent on asking the question, and she asks that, can you please share your views about how the inner conflict of sannyasi in Prakriti Pratishod actually is linked with the title of the play? As we see, he had been striving to gain victory over nature by cutting all the bonds of affection, desires, and human relationship.
Yes, but Prakriti does not only mean outside nature. Prakriti also is the nature within. And the point that if you look up that Jivansriti section, you will get your answer there. The Prakriti within Shunnashi, which is also denying, he is denying love by turning away from that young girl. And then when she is dead, the tremendous amount of remorse that he feels. And also, again, even the Prakriti outside is not only flowers and plants and meadows. The Prakriti outside also contains the human life, the people. Therefore, that is also there from which he was trying to cut himself off. And it is precisely this that he has to learn. He cannot deny that urge of nature, whether it is the outside nature or whether it is the nature within. And that is the pratishod which Prakriti takes upon him by claiming the child for itself. The child is dead. He cannot revive the child anymore. Therefore, the love that had been gushing out of him by that time ultimately fails, and he is filled with a tremendous sense of remorse. If you just look up that Jiban Shruti, please, you will find your answer there. He gives it in details. He has an entire section devoted to Prakriti Pratishod in that. And mind you, he relates it to how from the Shondha Shongit stage, he moves on to the Prabhat Shongit stage and he says, I myself had immersed myself in a dark cave from which I emerge to a burst of sunlight, and it is the Jara Shapnabhango. Therefore, in fact, Shonnashi is, in a way, his own self projection. I mean, I will not say it is a life story, but in a way, that's the kind of artistic self projection that he's probably trying to do there.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Words cannot be enough.
Thank you.
Okay.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Okay, sir. Thank you for giving us such a lot of time. And thanks to the participants as well. We had thought that our principal sir would be here, but somehow he is not available at this moment. But I would like to end today's session by providing our heartfelt thanks to Professor Abhijit Sen, Abhijit Da of our very own DOMIL, and all the participants who has been over here with us for all this time for their wonderful questions. And this is for the participants that if they are interested in our seminar proceedings named Shakespeare in India Criticism, Translation and Performance 2017 volume of UGC National Seminar, you can have sirs, that is Professor Abhijit Chen's essay over there. And if you want, you have the mail ID of our Department of English, and you will get that over there. You can have that. Thank you, sir. So I can call it a day, and thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.